Sonic is not that popular in Japan. Or at least, that's the rumor people love to spread. But over the years, Japan has quietly one-upped us by hoarding Sonic games exclusive to their region. All jokes aside, let's talk about some of them. Did you know Sonic's very first spin-off game might have been a Japan exclusive puzzle game? Sonic Eraser, a Sonic-themed puzzle game that released in 1991, potentially making this title Sonic's second official game in the series. While the exact release month remains unclear, it likely came out shortly after the 1991 debut of Sonic the Hedgehog. A quick disclaimer, while the games I'm covering in this video were originally exclusive to Japan, some have since been re-released in various collections or made available through other means. But for this video, we're focusing on their original context, when they first launched as Japan-only titles. That said, a few on this list have been nearly lost to time, making them even more fascinating to uncover. But before we get to the time Sonic joined the police force or when he and Tails were slinging popcorn on the street, let's talk about one of his first and most obscure spin-offs, Sonic Eraser. Okay, first off, that's the only track in the game and it's nails on chalkboard, so let's pick some different background music here. Sonic Eraser is playable on the Sega Mega Drive, known as the Sega Genesis in North America. And it was a falling block puzzle game where colorful shapes descended from the top of the screen. Match the pieces to make them disappear and avoid letting that stack pile up too high. If that sounds a lot like Columns or Puyo Puyo, you're not wrong. Though funny enough, Puyo Puyo also debuted in October of that same year. There's honestly not much else to say about Sonic Eraser. Sure, there's a versus mode, but even for its time, plenty of puzzle games had already done this formula better. The only Sonic thing about it is the title, and Sonic just standing here emoting every once in a while. The game remained pretty obscure, even as Sonic the Hedgehog was flying off the shelves, and that's largely because Sonic Eraser was exclusive to Sega MegaNet, a subscription-based gaming service Sega launched in late 1990. Sega Eraser was included with Sega Game Toshokan, meaning Sega Game Library, a special cartridge that was bundled with a modem peripheral called Mega Modems that allowed players to connect to Sega MegaNet through a dial-up service. And with the subscription, players could download and play games exclusively through that service. Games like Flicky, the Phantasy Star 2 text adventures, and who could forget Megamind? No, not that one. For 4,800 yen, roughly $32 at that time, paid every 6 months, subscribers could download and play games directly through the service, making it one of the earliest forms of subscription-based gaming. Sega MegaNet would shut down in 1992 with reportedly 3,500 subscribers at the time of the end of the service, and Sonic Eraser would become more or less forgotten once the subscription ended. Most of the Western Sonic community never knew this game existed until around 2004. That year, Sega of Japan included Sonic Eraser as part of a new service on their website called B Club, where visitors could download old Mega Drive games. And this gave the fan site Sonic Cult the opportunity to unearth the game, decrypt its files, and release it to the public. So while Sonic Eraser isn't exactly a masterpiece, this has a special place in Sonic history. And it's pretty simple to track down these days, but allow me to stir the pot. The title screen shows that this is clearly taking place within a book called Sonic Eraser, one that Sonic is stuck in until the game is done. That means that this could technically be the very first entry in the Sonic storybook saga, making it a trilogy all along. You heard it here first. But let's jump ahead to March 1994. Sonic was now a cultural phenomenon with 4 successful mainline titles under his belt. In their fierce competition with Nintendo, Sega was also pushing Sonic games onto their portable console, the Game Gear, the answer to the Game Boy. Enter Sonic Drift, a racing spin-off released in Japan that same year. Sonic Drift marked the franchise's first foray into racing, with Sonic, Tails, Amy, and Dr. Eggman competing in the Chaos Grand Prix, featuring a total of 6 tracks inspired by levels from Sonic the Hedgehog. And the game gave each character unique handling and speed, like Sonic's top-tier acceleration but poor handling, or Tails' slower speed but precise controls. However, critics weren't impressed. The tracks felt repetitive, the controls clunky, and comparisons to Super Mario Kart, Nintendo's racing juggernaut, were inevitable. With Computer and Gaming Magazine reporting, quote, "The next Sonic game to hit the Game Gear won't, in fact, be Sonic Drift, because it's apparently been scrapped for not being very good." Still, Sega wasn't done with the concept. A sequel, Sonic Drift 2, was released worldwide in 1995, with new badass characters like Knuckles, Metal Sonic, and Bang the Sniper, plus tracks inspired by Sonic 2 and Sonic 3. Unfortunately, this also received mixed reviews, which effectively ended the Drift series. Both titles eventually did resurface as extras in Sonic Adventure DX, Sonic Gems Collection, and Sonic Origins Plus. But Sonic Drift wasn't the only Japan-exclusive Sonic title on the Game Gear. In April 1995, Sega released Tails Skypatrol. Or is it Tails' Skypatrol? This was one of 2 games in the franchise to feature Tails as the main character. This little horizontal scrolling shooter featured Tails going on a solo adventure, and during his travels he stumbles upon an island, devoid of life, except for this senile old lady who's riding around on these steel tracks. This is Witchcart, the main villain of the game, who Tails has discovered has taken over the island and has been turning any opposition into crystals. Armed with a golden ring, Tails decides to make this his business and has to navigate 5 unique stages, dodging obstacles and defeating enemies along the way. But Tails' Skypatrol also has this unusual backstory. It was outsourced to a team named Japan System House, who mainly worked on converting Sega's games into 8-bit versions for other consoles. Funny enough, Tails' Skypatrol originally had nothing to do with the Sonic series, and would have featured its own original characters with a focus on being more of an educational game. It was slated as a launch title for an unreleased handheld console that was going to be aimed as a cheaper alternative to the Game Boy. But eventually, this system was cancelled, and to recoup the costs of development, Japan System House pitched this as a Game Gear title, with Sega making the decision to have Tails featured as the main character of the game instead. So that brings me to this interesting rumor that the game started as a Disney project, with prototype footage showing Tails fighting Pete as a boss. Get out of my way! Additionally, many have drawn similarities between Witchcart and Miserabelle from Castle of Illusion starring Mickey Mouse. One of the developers, Alice Kagamino, was asked about this on Twitter back in 2015, and responded that they couldn't provide specifics, but the enemy designs still have the same impression in the final game as they did in the original, back when Tails wasn't the main character. So it's pretty likely a Disney game was in the works here and the license was either dropped to promote Sonic instead, or things maybe fell through with Disney. But perhaps one day we'll get the full story here. Despite these portable stinkers, Sonic was dominant in the console market. He was finding his way into arcades as well. And as you can tell at this point, Sega loves throwing Sonic into random experiments. I give you all Waku Waku Sonic Patrol Car.
Yeah, みんなこんにちは。俺の名前はソニック。俺の仕事は悪い奴を捕まえること。
Hell yeah. The internet has made this little arcade title somewhat well known in the community, and was released shortly after the initial Sonic the Hedgehog game in December of 1991. It's more of a kid's ride than an arcade title, but I would say some elements are fused here. In this little experience, Sonic decides to join the police force, and the children that sit in this little police car will be joining Sonic on his adventure to protect and serve, motherfucker. Looking back on the original Sonic movie, I think we've come full circle. But within this little ride was a small screen at the center of the contraption, and before the ride begins, you get this little introduction from Sonic, voiced by Takashi Kusao, who is probably best known as the voice of Trunks from Dragon Ball Z. The Dragon Ball blood in Sonic continues to run deep. This was also the very first time we'd see a voice Sonic. So after his rousing speech about justice, the ride begins, and with this little wheel, the player would control the car on screen. The actual ride itself would rock left and right with the movements of the wheel to add that sweet interactive experience. It starts as a casual patrol in the streets, Green Hill Zone playing in the background while flickies cross the road, until Eggman shows up. Yeah, the doctor has committed one too many traffic offenses, and it's up to you and Sonic to book him. You can activate the siren on the ride and pursue him as Sonic damages his vehicle until he's had enough and leaves. Any way that you play this game, Eggman gets away, and it's odd to me that there's no animation of Sonic putting Eggman in cuffs and taking him away. It's an adorable little game though, and like Sonic Eraser, it's part of Sonic's very early history. So if you guys have played with this thing or spotted it in the wild, let me know in the comments below. This marked the beginning of several Japanese exclusive arcade machines for the Sonic series, mostly branded under the name SegaSonic. The first and probably the most well known is SegaSonic the Hedgehog, a 1993 arcade title that introduced Mighty the Armadillo and Ray the Flying Squirrel. In this game, Sonic and his new friends are captured by Dr. Eggman and thrown in jail. And I'm surprised Eggman never used this machine again because apparently it's fast enough to trap Sonic. But of course, it's not long before they bust out. Using a trackball embedded into the arcade cabinet, players guide the characters through isometric stages, dodging obstacles and jumping their way out of Eggman's base. Even though this predates Sonic 3D Blast, I get a similar vibe. Coming from someone who had the pleasure of trying this game out, it's very difficult. Maybe this game would be a lot easier if there were traditional joystick controls, but using this trackball gets frustrating. Ugh, my poor hands. You might be a little disappointed if you're expecting an epic endgame boss here, because Sonic and friends just confront Eggman at the end and he presses a self-destruct button to blow up his whole tower. I always wondered why they went with the name SegaSonic the Hedgehog for this title. But here's an odd detail. Turns out, Sega's trademark for Sonic was still pending approval in Japan. And to avoid legal issues, likely with their arcade rival Taito and their Sonic Blastman game, they went with SegaSonic instead. But this wasn't the only game in this line of SegaSonic titles. There was a cancelled predecessor, known as SegaSonic Brothers, slated for a 1992 release. A puzzle game featuring 3 Sonics in different colors, prototypes of what later would become Mighty and Ray's color schemes. The goal was for players to chain Sonics of the same color into squares or loops to clear the board. But this game didn't end up testing well with audiences in Japan, and Sega decided not to release it, which caused this game to go missing for 26 years? Yeah, the first playable public demo wouldn't be seen until a 2018 arcade show named California Extreme. Insane. But there's now footage on YouTube for all to enjoy, giving a glimpse into this long-lost chapter in Sonic's history. By the way, the music that you're listening to right now you may recognize from the bonus stages in Sonic 3. But what if I told you this track originally came from SegaSonic Brothers? Yeah, when you hit stage 40, this theme will play, and this would have been 2 whole years before the release of Sonic the Hedgehog 3. That means this track was originally intended for this cancelled game and not Sonic 3. Imagine that. But next up is SegaSonic Cosmo Fighter, another children's ride that feels like a follow-up to Waku Waku Sonic Patrol Car. But this time, Sonic's traded in his police badge for a spaceship. Yes, I know this also came out in Australia, but we're rolling with it. Anyway, this first hit arcades in Japan in April of 1993, with Eggman taking his talents back into space to capture space animals to power his machines. Naturally, Sonic takes to the stars as well in his trusty spaceship, and players will pilot this ship, dodging obstacles and firing weapons to damage Eggman. Destroy his ship's armor and he manages to escape once again, but the game will rank your score based on how well you did. But if you were a kid in the 90s, you probably got off this exciting ride craving some popcorn. Well kid, lucky for you, there's SegaSonic Popcorn Shop, released that same year. This thing actually did combine a video game with a popcorn dispenser. I would have given anything to have played this when I was a kid. So after you put in your money, you'd pick the flavor of popcorn you wanted, butter, salt, or chili. Yuck. But once your flavor was picked, a minigame would start on the machine, with Tails adding your popcorn to the conveyor belt behind Sonic. But Dr. Eggman couldn't let people make popcorn in peace, so it's up to you to control Sonic to help him get to the end of the conveyor belt while avoiding Eggman's sledgehammer. But your popcorn isn't done yet. Sonic takes it directly into the stove to cook, and you'll turn this green crank to help him stir, but Eggman's round ass wants a piece, and Eggman's round ass still wants a piece, and at this point of the experience, popcorn should be popping in the machine to give that extra effect. But at long last, your snack is finished, and Tails hands you the cup of popcorn after everyone had their nasty gloves all over it. And it's finally delivered to you through a hatch on a machine. This is some old school charm that you don't see a lot these days, but SegaSonic Popcorn Shop is pretty famous among hardcore fans. So much so, it was even referenced in Studiopolis Zone in Sonic Mania. I really adore this set piece, by the way. Hi, it's me. If you're enjoying this walk through Sonic's history, consider joining and becoming a member. Just like Spoobini, Kenny, Lauderdale, and Pam, who help to keep the lights on around here. You see how bright they are? But seriously, it would be a huge support. Otherwise, I'm gonna stick a NordVPN sponsorship here, and you don't want that, do you? Do you? If you weren't much of a popcorn fan, there was a sister machine to the SegaSonic Popcorn Shop called SegaSonic Cotton Candy Scramble. A machine that would have dispensed cotton candy, and no doubt there was an adorable playable minigame that came along with it. But this machine was cancelled before it even was released. We only know it was presented to the public one time at the Japanese Amusement Machine Show in 1994. But based on surviving images, it looks like this minigame would have had something to do with the tornado, or maybe pulling some lever to traverse the skies while your cotton candy was being made. But maybe this cotton candy machine will turn up somewhere someday. If SegaSonic Brothers was found, why not our elusive cotton candy machine here? But that completes the SegaSonic series, and while all exclusive to Japan, except this one, all of these were based during Sonic's early days. But there is one arcade game out there that features modern Sonic that never left Japan. Sonic Athletics. a 2013 arcade title found at Joypolis in Tokyo, Japan. Essentially, it's a reskinned Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games, and you line up along a set of treadmills to take part in 3 athletic events: the 100-meter dash, the long jump, and 110-meter hurdles. Up to 8 players can compete at once, with Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, and other characters from the series joining the roster. I guess Nintendo didn't give them the licensing to use their characters here. But it's pretty self-explanatory, just do these motions on the treadmill harder than everyone else. Funny enough, I did play this game during one of my trips to Japan, not knowing that this game never officially left the country. Now I have no footage to prove it. But I will say, talking about this game in comparison to SegaSonic the Hedgehog and the Popcorn Shop, arcade games seem to be missing a lot of that 90s magic. Arcades as a whole are on the decline in Japan, which probably encourages Sega and other companies to repurpose existing assets to make games like Sonic Athletics instead of developing full arcade titles from scratch. But I don't know, maybe I'm just getting old and kids today would rather play games like First Descendant and Girls Frontline instead. But speaking of mobile games, there was a whole line of Sonic games exclusive for Japan's phones back in the day. Sonic Cafe, a subscription service launched in December 2007 for specific mobile devices. For 315 yen per month, players could access a library of downloadable games from Sonic Team's intellectual properties, many of which were reskinned versions of card and board games. You had classics like Sonic Gammon, an ass-clenching backgammon game between Sonic and Eggman as they trash-talk each other between moves. Well, not really, but we can dream. But there are other titles like Sonic Poker, Reversey, and even Sonic Fishing, which you probably would forget is even related to Sonic after a while. I guess we can pretend this is a day in Big the Cat's life and call it the first game in the series starring our boy. But there are around 35 of these mobile titles, many of which can be dubbed as shovelware and barely related to the Sonic license, but out of all of these games, there are a few highlights worth mentioning. Take Sonic Kart 3DX, a kart racer predating the Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing series. Released for iMode 90X devices, it allowed players to compete over Japan's cellular network in Grand Prix and time attack modes. Having 5 courses and multiple camera options were impressive for the time, though seeing Sonic race alone in this footage today, this makes me sad and I don't know why. Then there is Sonic Golf 3D from 2006, with these interesting models, almost giving it a Sega Saturn aesthetic. This is also compatible for the iMode 90X series, and something about this game is just surprisingly cozy. Nostalgic graphics with these familiar backdrops and a solid soundtrack for an old mobile game. Sonic Hopping was an interesting one to me because it's a jumping puzzle where Sonic has to navigate over holes on a pogo stick to get all the rings on the map. So why not just jump? Was Sonic really this bored that day? But despite this ridiculous concept, this little puzzle game has some depth, getting increasingly more difficult with each passing stage, as the platforms will start to break under Sonic's weight. And what's this? Switches to activate other platforms? I mean, look at this complexity. How come we never got a Sonic Hopping sequel? Oh, we did?
Oh my god!
Sonic Hopping 2, which just seems like Sonic pogo-sticked his way into one of Eggman's bases. Okay, that sounded wrong. But you'd think a sequel would give this game a bit more variety, but my gosh, it's literally this the whole time. Talking about these games in detail is a bit challenging because a lot of them are considered lost or partially lost media, and aside from gameplay footage from gaming archaeologists, many of them have just disappeared into the void. Like Nakayoshi Chao. I've heard several people over the years wanting to raise a Chao on their mobile phones, and Sega gave that privilege to Japanese ones only. Nakayoshi Chao, translating to Good Friend Chao, was a 2002 game for iMode 504i devices, and is one of the titles in this lineup that has been completely lost to time. I'm not saying there's no hope, but there's no footage I could find of this game anywhere on the internet. But in this game, you could raise a Chao on your mobile device with similarities to the Chao Garden found in Sonic Adventure and Sonic Adventure 2. Though since it's an old mobile device, I'd say it's probably more like the little VMU minigames for the Chao that the Adventure games supported. Since information on this game is scarce, it's hard to know the full depth of the pet system itself, but it seems you'd have been able to pet and talk to your Chao, as well as play games such as Rock, Paper, Scissors. A few screenshots survive, but that's all we have for now until some historian digs this up from the depths of the old cellular graveyard. But finally, here's one I think everyone would appreciate: Shadow Shoot, the second Sonic game to give Shadow a gun. This was a mobile title meant to promote the release of Shadow the Hedgehog, and has Shadow overcoming several stages to get his green Chaos Emerald back from Dr. Eggman. As the screen automatically scrolls, the player will move Shadow to dodge obstacles while shooting enemies. Pretty simple game, but unlike Sonic biding his time on a pogo stick, It actually has a little bit of variety with unique stages throughout. This also included bosses and the ability to upload high scores onto leaderboards. So someone out there was once the ultimate champion of Shadow Shoot and has no way to prove it. Some of these games may have not been masterpieces, but they all tell a story. A story of Sega's creativity and love of Australia, apparently. But let me know if any of these were new to you in the comments below, and hey, if any of you managed to track down that Cotton Candy Scramble machine, send me a video. I owe it all to us to finally tell that story.